Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I actually looked at any new Marvel Legends figures, so I'm well overdue, and there's no better time to pick up the baton than now in the 50th anniversary year of Wolverine. Yes, of course, this is the big birthday bash for the character this year, and Hasbro are releasing an awful lot of Marvel Legends sets to celebrate this important milestone in the character's history. So we're getting 4 sets, and this is the first of 4. And I'm sure this will be a massive crowd pleaser because this is a set that fans have been wishing for quite a while. It is a 2-pack featuring Wolverine as Patch. Unbelievable that we've never had a Patch Wolverine before now. And a Joe Fixit Hulk. So without further ado, let's take a look at this packaging. This is brand new packaging. It is in that standard sort of oblong box that we've seen several times before with these anniversary sets, but the branding is all new. So what we do see is this essentially black borders. We have the Wolverine logo. Of course, we have the window display with the figures on show there looking really cool with a yellow background, and we'll take a closer look at that in a moment. But we have on the sides these sort of claw tear marks, and underneath the claw tear marks, we have these fantastic images, which if we look at the side panel, we can see there's this one here of Wolverine, and of course on the opposite side we have the Joe Fixit Hulk. This is newly commissioned artwork, and we can actually see a closer look at this when we look at the back of the packaging, because we can see here this new approach they've taken, which I have to say I think is actually tremendously effective. I really like this. What they've done is commissioned some brand new artwork by a new artist, which is in and of itself paying homage to a classic Wolverine comic book cover. In this case it is Wolverine 8, of course, featuring Patch and the Joe Fixit Hulk in their tuxedos. It's a classic cover, and they've done a really nice job of updating this artwork and paying homage to that original image. This is really nice and very presentable. This is a very different way of presenting their artwork on the back of the box. I really like this. I think this works really well. I think it's very displayable and is really quite fun. It's largely text-free, but there is a little bit of information there in the top right-hand corner. But I think this looks really good actually, and I really like this approach. I also like the use of the black and the contrast of the yellow there. And if we take a look at the interior inlay, we can see that actually this yellow card is made up of a collage of different panels taken from Wolverine issue 8, which I think is a really nice touch. It makes it feel bespoke and unique to this particular release, and I think does a really nice job. And I really like that contrast between the yellow and the black. I think that works tremendously well. So all in all, I really like this packaging. I think this is a marked improvement over what we've seen in recent years. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at Patch. Now, as I said at the top of the video, I can't believe that it's taken this long for us to get this variant of Wolverine. It's such an important alter ego for the character, and one that I grew up reading a fair bit about. So I've long wanted this version of the character. I'm pleased that we finally have Patch. And in terms of the head sculpt, this looks to be pretty similar to previous releases we've had. I'm put in mind of the Uncanny X-Men 275 cover version in the yellow and blue costume, except of course this time we have the eye patch, and I think, you know, for the most part this is actually a really good head sculpt. This definitely looks like Wolverine to me. I really like how they've approached the hair. Sadly there's not much in the way of paint washes running through this. It would have been nice if there'd been, say, a bit of a blue tint running through the hair there, just to give it a little bit more depth and texture, and to be a little bit more comic book accurate as well. Would have been quite nice. But otherwise I can't really fault this. This looks really nicely in proportion. It looks really accurate to what we see on the page in terms of the sculpting, and I think they've done a really nice job of it. And I have to say the sculpting for the rest of the body is really good. There's nothing really new or innovative here. There's not much to write home about. Obviously what we can see is that the main body is sculpted in the plastic. Then of course we have this sort of rubber overcoat for the main blazer, I suppose, that's sort of wrapped around it and sort of glued into place. I don't have any issues with this approach at all. However, I do take issue with the lack of paint apps that we see. And this is kind of across the board these days from Marvel Legends, but I think it's particularly noticeable when they have a white overcoat or a lab coat, because it just feels very sterile and there's just not a lot of life in it. It is nicely sculpted, but it really needs a little bit more paint here and there, just to bring it to life, give it that bit of depth and texture that's sorely lacking here. But other than that, I do really like the bow tie. I think that works really well. And if we look at the claws, I love what they've done with the hands here. These claws work really well. Each one is individually obviously slotted into place, but they're quite a solid chunky claw. None of them are bent, which is fantastic. There's none of that bending that you sometimes get in the packaging. So I think this works really well. I'm really impressed with these claws. I think they're really solid, and I'm very happy with the presentation. And then if we look at the legs and the shoes, again, this is just basically a simple trouser and shoe. It is nicely done. I think this actually might be a first sculpted in this scale, because of course Wolverine's slightly shorter, so I don't think they've recycled this. This actually might be brand new. But this looks pretty cool. It all looks quite neat. Again, lacking the paint wash, which is something that is a constant issue with these figures, but otherwise the sculpting itself is top notch. Articulation wise, there is a ball joint at the top of the neck, so of course the head will spin all the way around, and it will lean left and right a pretty good distance too, which is great. And of course it will nod forwards and backwards, but not quite as much as I would have liked, to be honest. This feels a bit limited in terms of what he can do, and I would have expected a bit more. Now, it does have ball joints in the shoulder, so the arms will lift up and out, and of course there's a complementary bicep swivel there, so no issues so far. There is a double joint at the elbow, but I found this really quite restrictive. I could only really get one of the joints to work. I couldn't get them to work in unison. Now, there is a pin swivel at the wrist, allowing the hand to rotate all the way around, and I suppose hinge forwards and backwards, but this also felt a little bit limited, really. Now, there is a swivel at the waist, allowing the figure to move from side to side, and there is an ab crunch there, but again, I couldn't really get an awful lot out of this. There's ball joints in the hips, allowing the legs to kick out to the side. There's a complementary thigh swivel at the top there. The legs will kick forwards and they'll go backwards a little bit. And then there's another double joint this time at the knee. And kind of a similar thing, really. I can get the lower leg to get back to about 90 degrees, but really getting both of those joints to work together, not so much. And then there is an ankle pivot, so of course the foot will hinge from forwards and backwards, and it will also rock from side to side. But again, a little bit limited in terms of just how far you can get that to hinge forwards and backwards. In terms of extra accessories, we do get an alternate pair of closed fists without the claws, and we get an alternate head. This head isn't too dissimilar to the one that we already have. Of course, there is a slight smirk, and that's the only thing that really differentiates this one to the previous. I think I probably would have preferred to have something a little bit more exaggerated, something that felt very, very different, maybe a growl or a snarl, something like that, maybe showing some teeth, I don't know. Just something to really distinguish it. The difference between these two heads is actually very, very subtle, but hey, I'll take it. All in all then, for me, I'm going to give this figure 3 stars, which may sound like sacrilege because this is not a bad figure, but it's a little bit underwhelming. Now, I'm really delighted to finally have Patch. I think they've done a really nice job with the presentation of this figure overall. I think that the choice of heads is really good. I think it's great that we actually have, obviously, Patch in this this particular outfit. I think it works really well. The tuxedo, very different look for Wolverine, so I do appreciate it. I think they've done a good job, and I'm very glad to have it in the collection. That said, there's a couple of things that really underwhelm me and disappoint me. So number one has to be the articulation. It feels like all the joints are there, all the points of articulation that you'd expect are there, but really getting them to work together and actually getting the most out of those joints seems almost redundant in a lot of places, because although the articulation's there, you can't really get the most out of them, if that makes any sense. Apologies if it doesn't really, but it just feels a bit restrictive. It feels like it looks like there's more available than there actually is, let's put it that way. So I did struggle with some poses with this figure, which felt a little bit restrictive and a little bit disappointing in that sense. The other main criticism I have is, again, the lack of paint wash. This figure feels very stark. It is very black and white, and it doesn't feel like there's an awful lot of depth or texture to the figure, and it does create this sense of it being quite plastic looking, which is a shame. Next up, we have the Joe Fixit. Now, this is actually the 3rd Grey Hulk we've had in the last 12 months. And be prepared for the fact that a lot of the criticism I'm going to level at this figure today is the fact that this is another standard reissue and doesn't feel particularly fresh or original. Having said that, if we take a closer look at this head sculpt, this actually is brand new. Now, at first glance, I thought this was simply a reissue of the previous Banner and Hulk set that was released last year for the Avengers 60th anniversary line. However, it's not. The hair is actually very subtly different, even though the expression is very, very similar. The hair is a lot flatter and closer cut, which is quite interesting. So this is a slight variant on an existing sculpt, and it is technically new, so full credit to them for doing this. It's maybe too subtle to actually be noticeable, I think, at first glance, but rest assured it is different to what we've had previously. That being said, I think this is a good head sculpt. I think this works really well. It is the first of 2 heads that we get, which is great, and I think in terms of the overall look, the paint apps, some nice detailing here, some nice shading to really draw out some of the sculpt in there, and I think this works pretty well for a nice stoic head for the character. Sadly, I can't say the same about the rest of the body. This is pretty much a straight reissue of what we've seen twice before now with two previous Joe Fixit figures. The actual body piece may be a slightly new wrap in terms of the detailing on the pockets, for example, but otherwise, really, this is just a new paint job, and it's a very basic paint job at that because, of course, it is just white. Again, as I said with the Wolverine, there's no shading here, there's no detailing, which really feels a bit plastic and a bit bland looking. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it is underwhelming. And then of course we have the same legs and shoes that we've seen before previously on the Joe Fixit figures. They work, it's absolutely fine, but at the same time I have issues with this particular moulding in terms of the articulation, which we'll see a little bit later, and it's a shame to just see this simply reissued yet again. Articulation wise, there is a ball joint in the top of the neck, so the head will spin all the way around and it will rock from side to side a little bit as well. Now it will also nod up and down, but again, like the Wolverine, bit disappointing here. It doesn't really go a huge distance, as much as I'd like it to see anyway. Now it does have ball joints in the shoulders, but the arms don't go all the way up, they only go about 75% of the way, which is a bit of a shame. And then there's a pin swivel at the elbow, allowing that lower forearm to spin all the way around and very smoothly hinge to 90 degrees, which I think works well on a big size character like this. There's another pin swivel at the wrist, allowing the hand to rotate all the way around, but again, even though it is supposed to hinge forwards and backwards, I can't really get it to work with these cuffs. I think there's a swivel at the waist to allow the figure to move from side to side. There seems to be a bit of give here, but not an awful lot. Likewise, when it comes to the ab crunch, I can't really get this bend forwards or backwards, so I'm not sure what's going on. There is a ball joint at the top of the hips, allowing the legs to kick out to the side, and there is a complementary thigh swivel there. The legs will kick forwards and backwards a little bit, and there is another pin swivel at the knee, allowing that lower leg to bend to about 90 degrees, and of course, swivel from side to side. And then we have an ankle pivot, which again, quite limiting. It will hinge forwards and backwards slightly, and it kind of will wobble side to side, but not enough to pose really. Accessories wise, he's very similar to Wolverine in that he comes with an extra pair of gripping hands and an alternate head. And these work pretty well together to create a number of different looks for the character, which I think is actually pretty cool. And I do really like this new head sculpt, the open snarling mouth. You can actually see the tongue inside there. I think this is really good, and again, feels brand new. So to be fair, this is actually really solid. For me then, this is another 3-star figure, and to be honest, my thoughts here are pretty much identical to the Patch figure. I think all in all, this is a nice figure. It's got a nice head sculpt, and it worked pretty well. It's nicely presented, but there's a couple of major issues, and they are the same issues: the lack of paint apps, and of course some of the limitation when it comes to the articulation, making this feel a bit more restrictive than it promises to be. Before I wrap up for today though, I did want to stand these characters next to each other so you can see the massive height differential between the two, because of course we have a slightly shorter than average figure in the Patch figure, and then we have a oversized figure in the Joe Fixit. So putting these together works really well. You're having little and large, and it makes a really nice contrast, and these look great together actually, because they are so different, which I think is very cool. All in all then, not a bad set by any stretch of the imagination. That being said, I do think it probably is one for die-hard collectors, people who particularly want this version of these characters in the tuxedos, and why wouldn't you? They're pretty cool looking. Or you really want that Patch figure, and to be fair, that was definitely the driving force for me on this one. And as action figures go, they're not bad. There's certainly worse Wolverine and Hulk figures out there in the line. So if you're missing either, this is a nice time for you to dive in and pick up a couple of really cool looking figures. Otherwise, unless you're a massive Patch fan, you could probably pass on this set. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.